Hello, everybody who has just signed in. We're going to wait another minute or two to see if anybody will arrive, anyone else will arrive. Brad, your boat's coming out this week, isn't it?
Yes, it is. I'm going to take the weekend and actually do the final decommission and get it ready for the boatyard to yank out of the water.
Right on.
Yep. So I think early next week they'll probably do it. It's nice because the weather turned warm. So I'm pretty lucky that way.
All right, 7:01. Should we get going?
Yeah, let's
wait another minute.
Yeah, no, we can rock and roll. Let's go. Let's go.
Okay.
On time.
Well, hello, everybody. Thank you for coming tonight. Brad and I did a series of webinars in the spring and kind of took the summer off, spent a lot of time, both of us sailing, but now that it's time to start taking boats out of the water, we figured it's time to start doing webinars again. So let me tell you a little bit about Brad, those of you that don't know him. He grew up in Cohasset, Mass on the South Shore, Massachusetts, sailing a bunch of different boats, strong dinghy background, but lots of big boat sailing too. He really had a successful college sailing career. And since he got out of college, which I'm not going to say when that was, he's been a career sailmaker and a career sailboat racer. He's worked on, he can build his own sails, design sails, repair sails, and he's very good at building stuff in general. And so that's why he does a lot of his own boat maintenance. And that's why he's a good resource to do this talk. So take it away, Brad.
Hello, everybody. Thanks, Stan. Yeah, as he said, I grew up on boats, messing around in boats. And but most of my life has been on other people's boats or on one design boats, which don't really require a lot other than some small maintenance. But about 4 years ago, I picked up a Pearson 33, which is really the first big boat that I've ever owned, with all the various systems, the hot water, the head, galley stove, a diesel engine, of course, sails, and all the bottom prep and all that. So I've learned a lot, and I am curious about it. I always have been. Even my dad talks about that. And it's been a lot of fun for me learning a bigger boat. And I very quickly after the first year came to realize the value of a list. Maybe it's because I'm getting older, but I found the list keeps me organized and helps me really make sure things are done and done hopefully right. I haven't busted anything yet. I haven't frozen anything up. So I think I'm doing it right. I've also thankfully just found the internet, of course, is a huge resource to pick people's brains and ask questions and so on and so forth. And so what I want to do tonight is, this is my simple list that you see on the screen. The miscellaneous projects always ends up the scribbled mess, but this is the start. And I actually keep this in my nav station so that during the course of the season, if I come across a project, then I write it down and I don't forget about it. My wife and I spent a good week on the boat this year. It's the first time we'd done that. And because it was quite a kind of a rebuild, fix it up project. But I said to her after the season was over, pretty much, I said, well, we had a great season. We learned a lot more about the boat. What project do you think we should add to the list? And she wrote down fitted sheets on the V-berth. So I thought, all right, we're really getting along here. We got most of the pumps and systems have been replaced and repaired. And so if we're getting down to thinking about things like sheets, then we're in pretty good shape. So I'm pretty happy about that. So let's start. What I do
is you make those yourself?
Well, yeah, sort of. I mean, again, you go online and you see how to modify fitted sheets for a V-berth, and there it is. So you start with a king size sheet and you fold it this way and that way, you cut it and bing, 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 and away you go. And so that was my wife's anniversary present a couple of weeks ago, was a set of fitted sheets for the V-berth. I think I finally got one of her gifts right. So what I do, I seriously do this. Stan, let's flip forward.
Okay,
next slide. Can you do that?
Yep.
Yeah, so I really honestly will go around the boat in the skiff and look at the boat. I look at it from the bow to the stern. 2 years ago, one of the things I noticed on the bow was that the rub rail where the mooring line curls over the corner of the boat, the bow of the boat, had cracked and was dried out, cracked plastic. And so I fashioned a piece of wood and fit it in there so that I've got a really good abrasion proof piece there for the line to ride on. I go around the top side. I look to see if there are any dings in it. I look at the stern. I look at the the ladder fittings. Just visual check. And this is just the beginning of the process. And from here, I go further and I start looking at systems. I look at the Dodger. That's actually Stan in the background.
Yeah, he
the
made me get in that picture.
That's good. But I know on my Dodger that through the course of time, the isinglass gets dry, shrinks, and the fittings don't always match up with what you've got on the deck or the cabin top of the boat. The bottom corner of the Dodger there, where it takes a hard turn, because the glass is shrunk, that snap button doesn't meet the snap on the deck. So I've got to either move the snap in the canvas or move it on the deck. I'll probably move it on the deck because there isn't a lot left in the canvas there. Check your isinglass. What we see around here is isinglass on Dodgers that are in a dirty environment, polluted air. The air, the moisture in the air contains contaminants. They can etch the glass, which allows algae and mold to grow. Gets ugly fast. The best way to make your Dodger look new is to replace the glass. On the Dodger, one thing to check is to take your fingernail or a little ruler, a metal ruler, and scratch the sun exposed stitching. If the stitching comes apart, it's much easier for a repair shop to restitch it before it comes apart than it is to get a Dodger that's, maybe the zipper sleeve or the chafe guard is all coming off because the stitching is gone. If you get it to your repair shop before it really comes apart, you're doing yourself a big favor. They can overstitch the areas. On my boom, you can see here this red and white line it's a jury rig. The lift that holds the boom up, you can see the broken wire there. And now I've lived with this for 2 years. And so this year on my list is to fix the little topping lift for the boom. What I've got works, but I should fix it properly. And then of course to go over to the binnacle and I look at the wheel and the steering components and try and make sure that's all right. Last year on the list was proper supports for my cockpit table. So I got that off the list this year. I used some rivets and riveted the supports in place and that was a small but pretty big improvement in the cockpit. Thing doesn't fall down when you got a table full of cocktails on there now. So that's good.
Is that a knife you got lashed to the lash down there too?
Yes, and actually I'm going to change that knife out because it's got a big serrated teeth on it, and I think that, I mean, it's sharp, but I think that if in New England, if I run over a pot buoy and I have to cut it free, which I don't want to do, that knife might not cut as well as just a plain, really sharp blade. So that knife is coming out of there. I'll change that. It's a good thing to have though. The winches. I'm going to go left to right here. This is halyard and main sheet winch, self-tailing, little Lumar, I think it is. On my list this year is to take it apart and clean and lubricate it. I haven't done it since I got the boat, and I think that it's important to do that. They do fine, but I want to clean them out. So that's that. I have new lines that I'm going to run through this for my reefs. There's one empty jammer there, and I want to run a new line through there for the reef because the reef line coming out of the boom is an old, rotten, horrible, moldy thing. So let's change that out. That's on the list. My stern light, the bulb was out. I know it. I got new bulb, but I got the wrong bulb. Yeah. I also noticed that the lens is very badly, I don't know, crazed. So I'm gonna see if I can get a replacement one. If not, I'll replace the whole light. It's online again, and you can replace it pretty easily. My Genoa sheet winch, starboard side, again, gonna pull that apart, take a look at it. Now, have I actually pulled the winch apart once a long time ago? Yes, I did. It was more nerve-wracking than I really found it needed to be. They're pretty self-contained. Be careful. There are parts that can drop over the side, so you don't want to have them go over the side. And it used to be called a damn it spring in there because the spring would jump off and go over the side, so somebody would yell damn it on it, But I need to lubricate my winches. I know I need to do that.
But yeah, Brad, I mean, back to online stuff. I mean, you can find instructions for how to repair most winches online, probably, right?
Oh yeah, absolutely. And like we're doing here, Stan, to me, this little presentation we're putting on is more about getting people to think and not being afraid to go forward and realizing that the resources are out there. I mean, they are out there, right, Stan? Even today, you were looking up an insignia for a boat, and I flipped on online, looked up the insignia, and said, "Yeah, those are dark blue or black." I mean, it's that simple. It just happens. So it's so easy and fun. So I think it's fun. I like to do the research, and I love crossing things off my list as the winter and the summer goes on. Do you have any questions, Stan?
We have one here. How often do you have to service your winches?
Oh, I think every couple of years or 3 years they should be serviced, and it certainly depends on how much you use the boat and the environment you're in. I think if you got a boat that's kept in a marina in a city where there's a lot of contaminants in the air, when it rains, it gets in and around the winch, all the workings in the winch, and it can affect the grease that's in there. So I admit I haven't done it in 4 years. I've owned the boat, but it's getting closer and more important for me to do that as I've gotten the big projects done. I want to get onto the winches. So yeah.
I also think those winches that are out in the cabin house probably need to be checked on a little more frequently. Like that, I know you're going to do that one, your halyard winch there, but that's under a Dodger. Salt water probably never touches that, right?
Hasn't yet, although we've broached many times, which I think is pretty funny. But no, that one hasn't gotten wet with salt water, not in a long time. I go through the bilge, through the engine department, and I check everything. Now, mind you, the picture on the left is of my bilge. When I got the boat, this boat was a complete mold mess. And I took everything possible out of it, everything. I took the fuel tanks out. I took the fuel tank out, the water tanks, all the wood that I could easily take out of the boat. I removed as much as possible so that I could get in there I used porch and patio mold and mildew cleaner, and I sprayed it everywhere. I used a toilet brush. I scrubbed inside out, upside down, everywhere. Rinsed it out with a hose and water, then vacuum dried it with a wet vac. I did that 3 times. And then the boat started to smell sweet, didn't have a stink to it. Now, when I'm sailing during the season, I usually throw a few drops of pine sol or less oil, anything, into the bilge. It dilutes with a little bit of water that you got in there. It sloshes around and it helps prevent mold and mildew from growing. It also helps dissolve any sort of grease or oil that might be dripping out of your engine if you've got any drips. I check the bilge pump switch, make sure that's functioning properly all the time, almost every time before I leave the boat on the mooring for the week when I'm not using it. I'll check that switch just to make sure it actuates properly. Move over to the engine. You can see I put in a new sump pump beneath the engine there. That was one of last year's projects. The prior one, having not been used a lot, was frozen. So I said, let's just get a new one. I actually put in a new raw water intake pump, which was a bit of a trick, but that was worth it. This engine is a Yanmar 2GM20, which is a really good, solid engine. I've heard good things about it. I've never owned a diesel before. I'm amazed at really pretty how simple it is, and that it, with some reasonable maintenance, it takes care of now. So today, because I'm pulling the boat next week, I went to an automotive store, a good one, 80 AP, and I asked the guy what's the best flushing solution to run through the engine before I shut it down. And he gave me some RV antifreeze. And I said, what's the best oil to put in the engine for the winter? He set me up with that. I got new oil filter. So Saturday when I go to the boat, I'll run the boat for a while, run the engine for a while. I'll go into the dock, and the routine goes like this. It's pretty simple. At the end of running the engine, when I get near to finish time, I'll shut the raw water intake seacock, open up the filter, and I'll pour fresh water through that. And then I pour through the antifreeze solution. It takes my boat about 3 gallons to push the antifreeze from the raw water intake filter through the exhaust. So 3 gallons, I know I've got it all through the engine. Then I'll shut the engine down. And at that point, I'll go and take I'll pump the oil out. I've got a special oil pump that I can suck the oil out because it's still warm. You can't pull the oil out while it's cold. It has to be warm. So I pump the oil out that's warm, get it as pumped out as possible. This engine holds about 1.5 quarts, 1 3/4 quarts of oil. It's not a lot. And then I pull the oil filter off. I've got an oil filter wrench. I pull that off, swap that out, put the new oil in, and then without any compression on the engine, I can turn the flywheel carefully, slowly, just to wet the new oil through all the parts inside the engine that I can. That's just a tip the local mechanic gave to me. On the right are the batteries. Oh, one last thing on the engine. This is the year I want to go into the engine. One thing I bought is engine cleaner, and it's a spray that can go on the engine. You don't want to get it on the rubbery parts, but and I just want to get all the gunk off it and clean it. And then I'll probably go and I'll wash it down with a spray of a combination of water and trisodium phosphate, TSP. And that'll prep it so that I can actually spray paint it and make sure the spots that are a little bit corroded are clean and don't corrode anymore. I want my engine room clean because that'll help me figure out if a drip of some sort starts. And if it's clean, you can tell if it's diesel fuel or oil or antifreeze just by the color of the drip. So that's kind of an important thing to do. I want my engine room clean. On all the boats I've ever had, even outboard motors, I've cleaned it every time I've used, winterized it. So over on the right are the batteries. These are new batteries last year. And so I will disconnect the cables. I've been told that if they're put away fully charged, they should be fine through the winter. You do not want to put a half-charged battery away because then the solution can maybe freeze if it gets really, really cold. So if you have any doubt about the temperature your boat's going to be stored at and you can take the batteries out, it's probably not a bad idea to do it and put them in maybe in your cellar. But I've also heard that you should not leave batteries sitting on a steel reinforced concrete floor because that'll drain the battery during the winter. So if you're going to put them down in your basement, put them on a wood shelf.
So you fully charge the batteries and then disconnect them.
Yep, absolutely. Yep. Let's flip forward. Okay, again on the engine, going to be looking at all the hoses. Excuse me. Be looking at all the hoses, the fluid levels, and make sure that they're all topped up and ready to go. I'll probably put in a new air intake filter this year, just to keep that clean. But everything else, I want to get on there. I want to take not a toothbrush, but take a little paintbrush, a little chip brush with that solution of the engine cleaner, and then trisodium phosphate, and clean all that stuff off there so that it can easily just clean it up so that I don't see any more dirt dunked on there. I want that clean. On the deck, I have already checked off the list of things, but on my water and fuel fill caps, the rubber gasket around those was cracked. And in the case of the water one was broken. So I went to the local hardware store, found the right diameter, put it on there. 59 cents later, they're all set. I'm comfortable that I won't be getting any water into my fuel tank in particular. At the same time, I'll check the fittings like the cleat that you see there, and make sure that it's all, secured properly and bedded properly and all that stuff. During the course of the summer, I was on my boat during a rain squall, and it helped me identify where I had a leak coming into the boat, which was a great breakthrough because it had been bugging me. The water was dripping down in behind the galley cabinet and landing on the dinner plates, and that was a pain in the neck. So I found out that the gasket around the port was in fact, compromised. So I got some silicone and I loosened things up and I opened it up and I bedded it back down, and away you go, sealed up. So that's good.
Hey, Brad, back to batteries. We got a question here about whether we'd recommend a trickle charge for the batteries. It's probably not necessary.
If you're as far as I know, you don't have to charge all the time. As long as if you put the battery away fully charged, that should be good through the winter, especially if it's fully disconnected. You run the risk of having some little short somewhere. I was on a boat once, and the batteries were discharging, and I found a medium-sized wire underneath the cowling on part of the engine, and this wire had been in there for a bunch of years, just vibrating away, and it wore through the casing on the wire, and then it was arcing on this cowling on the engine, and it was out of sight, so you couldn't see it. We were actually coming back from Bermuda, and we smelled electrical fire. That wasn't good. And anyway, I was able to figure it out, but that's what happens. I think I have a picture in a while to show you guys on my gear shift cable. But the stuff sits there and it vibrate for a long, long time while you're happily sailing around or doing anything you do. And it's this vigilance. It's the vigilance that really pays dividends in the end, because if you can stay ahead of stuff, then it helps. And what did I read? And was it Points East magazine or what? That the truth is, you might not want to tell your spouses, but a boat is nothing but problems. It's nothing but problems that you take from one harbor to the next. And so hopefully you get to a point where you're pretty much ahead of the problems and you can actually enjoy sailing. And that's what it's all about. So that's a good question.
Your friend Lizanne wants to know what she should do if the batteries are too heavy for her to move. Should we tell her to call you up and go get them?
I'll see you tomorrow, Lizanne. I'll be done. I can get the batteries off your boat for you. Any of this stuff, if any of you are reticent to do it or what, the beauty of the list and knowing your boat is when you walk into a boatyard and you say, look, I have this, I need that, I want that. Being organized and telling them pretty specifically what you want done will save them time looking through your boat, which will save you money. And then there'll be a better understanding of what you're trying to accomplish on your boat and get done. And I know boatyards appreciate that. They don't necessarily want a know-it-all customer, but they want somebody who knows their boat. I had a customer years ago who I sold some sales to, and she had a number of boats. But this gal was pretty impressive, curious, and she always knew her boats inside and out. And it was really kind of neat because she's just a funny little person who just enjoyed her boat, but really liked having the knowledge that she could pull out a through hull fitting, or she could put in a little cooling fan next to her alternator, or whatever it was. She wasn't afraid to go ahead. So yeah, know your boat. Okay, certainly checking the fuel tank and the fuel filter. That's high on the priority list. Pull it off, replace the cartridge. Not hard to do. You have to burp it a little bit so you don't get air lock in your fuel line. To that point, it's really good to know how to bleed your diesel. It's difficult to do at sea if you run out of fuel, but you might need to do it. If you don't know how to do it, I'm sure you can go online, look up your engine type, Yanmar 2GM20, bleeding the fuel. And I guarantee you it'll show me right where to bleed it. So I checked the fuel filter right there. It's easy access on my boat, so it's not a problem. The picture on the right is my stuffing box arrangement. And it drips about a little faster than 1 drip a minute. So I'm going to tighten it up a little bit this year. But the more important part of this picture to the right and above my stuffing box is my gear shift cable. And you can see that's what I was talking about a minute ago, that right there, can you circle that, Stan? Yeah, perfect. It is actually chafed through. Now, there's a rubber case that goes over a metal jacket, a rubber jacket that goes over a metal case, and inside the metal case runs a rod. I've got to replace this. I don't want that sitting there doing that. That's really bad. I have never replaced a throttle cable, I mean a gear shift cable. My gear shift seems to work okay, but I'm not going to leave that to a chance. No way. No way. I'm going to take care of it. So that's a really good thing for me to know about. It's on the list. It'll get done. That'll get done before my macerator. Inside the main part of the boat, the galley, the stove. Does the stove function the way it should? I know because my boat hadn't been used for a few years, that the jets for the little burners, had gotten crud in them and needed to be cleaned out. I used a little toothpick and I cleaned out the little holes in the burners. The thermocouple, which is in the oven that activates the gas valve to actually turn on the gas when it calls for heat. That was kind of dysfunctioning. I don't know what was wrong with it, but I replaced that, so that's good. One thing I do in the galley is clean. You can see I have a picture here in my cabinet of some food and the storage locker of some other items in there. I'm going to clean it all out. I don't want to leave any food on the boat. I don't care if it's a bag of crackers that hasn't been opened. Get it off the boat. Just get it off the boat. Because the next step we're going to do after we clean the boat out, we're going to wash the boat before we put it away. So the more you get out, the more you can wash. And what I usually do is I'll take like a Tilex tub and tile cleaner spray and spray all over the place and wipe it down. I don't wipe it clean to actually remove the Tilex. I leave it there for the winter so things don't mold and mildew. Just leave it on the surface, because in the spring, you're going to come back and you're going to mop it all down anyway. What amazes me actually is how many boats I've been on that have been undercover. And even though they're undercover, and I've got a nice cover on my boat, the boat still gets dirty, just sitting around. So I don't know where the dirt comes from. Blows in through the nooks and crannies and the cracks, and mildew will grow, especially if the boat sweats. Your boat cover should breathe some. So it's a real trade-off. But I leave the tub and tile cleaner, just leave it on the surfaces. I'll spray it on the wood surfaces, on the bulkheads, around the stove, and just leave it there for the winter. Let it prevent mold.
Case of beer for the guys in the yard is not a bad idea to leave behind, though, is it?
Not a bad idea. They definitely appreciate it, and it helps you can have a little more confidence that perhaps the boat was chopped properly when they put it on the stands and all that stuff. So yeah, absolutely. More cleaning. The ice box. I have a basic ice box. One of the things about my boat, I got rid of a lot of the more complicated systems. I was happy to have just an ice box. And a couple of blocks of ice and a bag of cubes last 3 or 4 days. Keeps things cold enough. You also learn what foods to bring that won't spoil. You don't take bananas. Things like red and green peppers last a long time without deep refrigeration. Things like that. The most important thing is that you can keep your beer and your sodas cold. But again, in 1 sec, Stan, again, in the ice box, tub and tile cleaner, spray it, leave it. Don't wipe it out. Just leave it in there.
Yeah, Brad, we got a question about Tilex, if that's harmful to wood or not.
I haven't seen it harmful on mine. If it's on raw wood, it may bleach the wood. I wouldn't leave it on bare wood, but on wood that's coated with varnish, it should be fine. So that was another thing I did a couple of years ago. I did an entire sand and varnish of the interior of my boat, which is a lot of work, but I'm really glad I did it because my boat's got a very shallow bilge, like a lot of newer boats. And when the boat heels, the water, any water that's in the bilge comes over the port of the starboard side and wets the wood, like in the bottom of the ice box there, right where it connects with the cabin sole. That wood has gotten wet. It's 30 years old, so it's starting to be a little bit, it's turning black in some places. I'm going to retrim that this winter. I've already got the plan in my head how to do it, and so I'll trim that up for next year. Keeping with the cleaning, keeping with the cleaning in the head, your pumps, this little actuated pump there, that will drain out if the handle's left one way, or it won't if it's left the other way. So I make sure that's drained out, and I'll get to how I do that in a moment. But again, clean out the stuff, tub and tile cleaner, spray it, leave it. The head itself, spray it, clean it, and just leave it. Spray it and leave it. I saw a question there about using that damp rid product. And yes, I think on my 33 footer, I think I've hanged 3 of those in my boat during the course of the winter. And it's pretty amazing how much moisture it draws out of the air, even though I've got a good cover and the boat's buttoned up. So I like the damp rid. It's just one more defense against mold and mildew. I don't like mold and mildew. It's bad stuff. So. Our rig.
Spars.
All the way, from the top of the mast to the bottom of the mast. If you have the opportunity to unstep your rig, I would recommend it once, at least every 5 years. And it may be, if you lost your rig over the side and it hasn't been removed and checked out in a couple of years or 5 years minimum, your insurance company may challenge the claim because the standing rigging hasn't been inspected. But I start at the top of the mast. I notice that my anchor light up there is 30 years old. It's a little bit tired, so I think I'll probably either replace the cap or replace the entire light. All the fittings up there, the clevis pins and the cotter pins, the wires, the VHF wire, all that sort of stuff should be well protected for the winter. You come down the mast, you've got shivs that you can look at. You've got your furling system you can look at. And certainly check, if you're doing this yourself, check the wire on your standing rigging, especially at the terminals, right where the swage fittings and the wire come together. On the right-hand picture, right stand, right there. Because that's where they'll start to break the strands first. And this stuff is in pretty good shape. This actually isn't my mast. I cheated on this one. This is a mast that's in the boatyard where my boat is. But the spreader tips, these are all places. The spreader tips are important to look at because the generally lays against the spreader, and if it's not well protected and have some padding there of some sort, then you can certainly tear the sail. So being proactive there is really, really important. Really important. When I started to de-rig my boat the other day, I had the sails off it, and the boom is sitting there. It's still attached to the mast. It's whack. The boom is just hanging there. There's nothing on it, nothing in the way. So I waxed it while it was there. It's all done, ready for next year. And that was something that had been bugging me for a while. Any of the lights on the mast, your steaming light, deck lights. My deck lights on my boat, the spreader lights are, one of them works, one doesn't. You know what I'm going to do? I don't use them. I'm going to get rid of them. It's one more thing to break, so I'm going to just get rid of them. I don't need them on the rig. And so I've got, we've all got flashlights, we've got headlamps and stuff like that. I think deck lights just aren't worth it. Don't need them. Again, the furler, checking your halyards. If you're going to leave your spar outside for the winter, even on sawhorses or something, it's a really good idea to pull your halyards and actually leave a messenger in the mast. because even though your mast may be down, and even though it's only winter and it's New England and the sun isn't that bright, the weather and the sun beats up your gear. So take it apart and leave a messenger in the mast.
Brad, we got a question about inspecting rod rigging. Similar method to regular rigging, yeah? I mean, just...
Well, rod rigging is a little more tricky. A good rigger, yes, visual inspection completely, absolutely. Top to bottom, all around it, especially where you've got rod that comes into a terminal of some sort, your ball fittings and so on and so forth like that. Their receptacles, where they land, is important to look at really closely. But a good rigger, I used to work with a guy who had this pink paint. It's kind of like the stuff that your dentist used to put on your teeth. You could tell if you were brushing your teeth or not. And he used that, and it would find cracks in rod. It would turn a different color or something. I don't know. Anyway, so if you're not doing it yourself and you're paying somebody to do it, it's worth just knowing what their process is. Visual inspection will catch 90% of it. But if you're really going to the nth degree, some sort of chemical test is probably worthwhile. I did see a question earlier quickly about, no, you can go ahead, Stan, about looking at sales. And yeah, it's important because there are other engines. The sales are our preferred engine, I like to think. I want to get back to the engine anyway, but first I'm going to touch on the sales. Look at your sales, corner to corner to corner. If you can lay it out, if you can lay your sales out in a clean place, if your house is big enough, mine isn't, to actually lay them out and take a look at all the corners, that's great. The Genoa wears out quickest and most where it whacks against the mast every time you tack. This sail that you see here on the left side picture is torn. That started where the spreader hits the sail. The sail's old. If you look closely at either of these pictures, you'll see stitching that's starting to fall apart. Just like your Dodger, it's a lot easier for your sailmaker to restitch things before it falls apart. So you'll save money and it'll be a better repair. The best way to winterize sails, to put them away, is dry, 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 fresh water, fresh water, fresh water. If you've got salt, if you think you've got salt on your sails, you're going to store the sails in your garage or even your attic or your basement, salt is an attraction for rodents. They go at it like a salt lick. And I can't tell you over the course of the years how many people have brought their sails in the spring, opened up the sail bag, and a rodent has gotten in and burrowed through several layers of sail material. And they don't seem to do anything with it except kind of rip it apart and make it into little fluffy balls. But it's, so as far as winterizing sails, if you can, maybe you're going down to the boat on a perfect fall day, there's no wind, and you can unroll your Genoa, hoist your main, let them dry in the dry northwest sun. Just let them dry, 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 dry. And then drop them and fold them as neatly as you can. That's a good time to really go over them head to tail. Look at the webbings that hold all your slides on and hold the rings onto the corner of the sail. Scratch at them, again, with your fingernail or a metal ruler. And if they fuzz up or if they burr up a little bit, the material may be getting shot. Webbing generally lasts about 5 or 6 years, about the half-life of a general sail. So at about 5 or 6 years, you may want to have your webbing replaced or restitched, because at 10 or 12 years, you're going to probably be thinking about replacing the sail. Maybe not so much for structural purposes, but as a general airfoil shape purposes. But rinse your sails if you think you've got any salt on them. Dry, 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 dry. How compact should you make your sails? I'm a fan of a neat fold. It doesn't have to be super compact. In fact, super compact may make it impossible for any residual moisture to evaporate through the material and get out of the bag. If you've got a barn and you're storing your sails in the barn, I know a couple of people that actually can suspend their sails from the rafters. Much less likely that a rodent's going to get it up there. If it has to go on a shelf or on the floor, pull it about a foot away from the wall, because rodents crawl along walls and they're less likely to get away from the wall and into the bag. So by looking at the webbing on the picture on the left, we've got a picture that shows two things. One, the webbing is showing signs of weakness in that it is getting corroded. It is badly stained, and a little hard to see here, but it is showing some signs of weakness at the edges of the ring. The ring itself looks like it might have been under spec'd on this sail and has oblonged out under load, or maybe the sail was used in a lot more wind than was expected. So maybe it's a racing sail. It probably is a racing sail. They tried to make it as light as possible, and that's the size of the ring that they got. So that ring and webbing should probably be replaced, unless that belongs to the sail on the right, which is showing signs of failure, complete failure. Laminated sail, lived its life. You can see that the white area actually is a spreader reinforcement. That is just below the spreader reinforcement. There's a good chance the sail was whacking against the spreader, maybe missing the reinforcement occasionally now and then. And so the laminate, the adhesive within the laminate, which was back when that sail was built, was probably a thermoplastic adhesive, has finally given up the ghost. The yarns are there, but the body of the sail is really starting to go. If you're a race boat, this sail is probably a candidate to be replaced. I want to go back to the engine very quickly, Stan.
Okay.
The fuel. There are additives to put in the fuel today. I got a bottle of some special additive that the guy at the store recommended for diesel engines through the winter. There are gasoline additives. Any seasonally used motor, people might know from their lawnmowers, their snow blowers, their chainsaws, I don't care what you use, outboard motors. And you can put additive in the fuel that will protect the fuel from the winter. There's also moisture absorbent, because with the new ethanol-based fuels, they seem to propagate moisture in the tank more readily than the old fuels. Your filters will catch some of it. They'll catch a lot of it. You'll actually push some of it through the motor as you run it, but I think it's best just to try and protect it. What's recommended to me from the mechanics I know is fill up your fuel tank on the boat for the winter, because less air in the tank means less ability for condensation to form in the tank, which means less moisture in the tank. So fill it up as best you can. If you've got a sailboat and your motor is an outboard, the winterization process on an outboard motor is pretty simple. It doesn't have to be complicated. If you can run it with water mufflers on the exhaust or in a tank with water in it, that's great. Fresh water, fresh water, fresh water. You buy fogging oil at either the marine store or the hardware store. The marine store is probably better for this. You open up the face of the carburetor, take the air filter off, and while the engine is running, you shoot this stuff right into the carburetor and let the engine smoke, 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 so that it almost stalls. And then when it's just about to shut down, this is while the engine's hot, you've already run it for a while, and just before the engine stalls out, you shut it down. And after that, you pull your spark plugs off and shoot some of this fogging oil into the cylinder itself, and then turn the flywheel carefully with no ignition on by hand slowly, just to get that fogging oil all over the cylinder and the cylinder head. Outboard motors, the other thing you can do, if possible, is to drain the bowl underneath the carburetor. There's usually a drain plug there. You can take it off with a screwdriver or a nut driver. Drain that out. gasoline that's left in a gasoline engine will go bad, go stale pretty quickly. And if you run the engine with it in there, it will create a varnish-like substance inside the carburetor. So you really don't want to run old gas through a carburetor. Find a good place to dispose of the gas, empty out the engine as best you can. I'm told the best way to leave a gasoline engine is run it dry so that you basically run out of gas. And it's fogged, you run it out of gas, and that way there's no residual gas left in the system to gum it up in the spring. So that's pretty much it. On my Yanmar 2GM20, I'm going to actually, I know my belts, I tightened it up a few weeks ago because it was pretty loose. I'm going to loosen that for the winter just because I just think I'm going to feel better about it. No reason to leave it under tension all winter. I think it could possibly, put a little strain on the alternator or on any part of it, the pulleys. And so let's loosen it up for the winter. It's easy enough to tighten in the spring. Any more questions out there, Stan?
There was one question about whether this is going to be recorded, which it is. And so this whole talk will be posted on our on YouTube. If you do a search for North Sales and what's the name of this talk? Winter boat storage. Winter boat storage tips, then it'll pop up. Probably won't be posted for another day or two. The other thing we wanted to say is one thing we didn't really touch on is work to the bottom of your boat. But Brad did do a webinar in the spring that was on May 3rd called Let's Talk Boat Prep. That's up on the YouTube page. And that talks all about managing stuff that's underneath your boat.
Yeah. So the other thing, Stan, about that is I am going to be curious when I haul my boat, and the boatyard is curious too, because I used a water-based paint last spring when I painted the bottom. And when I read the tech manual, it actually said in one part of the tech manual for this particular type of paint, it was okay to apply it to a damp hull. So I did that more as an experiment than anything else to see what's going to happen. And through the course of the season, it's an ablative paint. Through the course of the season, I wiped the boat down probably 3 times. Pretty standard anti-fouling properties as far as I could tell. But I'm more concerned about to see how this stuff actually stuck to the hull and how well it lasted. So I'll let anybody who wants to know about that. I'm very curious to see. It could have been a complete disaster. I don't know. But I'm hoping not. I don't think it was. So we'll see.
Do you see that question about zincs, Brad?
No, what was that?
Should they be serviced in any way over the winter?
Yeah, the safe thing to do is to pull a zinc, replace it. Mechanic in our boatyard told me last spring while I was replacing mine, he said, "Oh, your old zinc only looks like it's about 25% gone. Why don't you just leave it on for another year?" And I said, I'm going to get to this next question quickly. So I said, "No, I just want to replace it." And he said, "Well, okay, whatever." So it kind of makes sense mathematically that if your zinc has been in the boat for a season and it's only 25% gone, then you could let it go for another season. But no, I'd rather put new zinc on.
You replace it manually.
Oh, yeah. I just saw a really good question pop up about the water system on the boat, which I'm sorry, I didn't get to that. What do? I vacuum mine out with a wet vac. First of all, I use, thank you, Steve, for saying about the magnesium rather than zinc. I'm a saltwater guy. My water system in the boat, freshwater system, I've already drained it as best as I can. And the next step will be to pull a few key fittings apart and attach my wet vac to it and suck it out. Like I have a fitting at the bottom of the hot water tank. I suck it out rather than you push air through a compressor to get it out. And the only reason I do that is because when I suck it out, I'm pulling fresh, clean air in from outside, the end of the hose or the faucet or wherever it is. Maybe I'm a little bit overcautious about this, but with compressed air, you're pushing air that's run through a compressor through the system. And I don't know what might be in that air. So I'd rather suck it out with a vacuum than push it out with a compressor. It's my own thought. That's just Brad White doing his thing. But definitely want to get it out. I asked about antifreeze through the freshwater system and was told that as long as you do the best you can to drain as much as you can and get the elbows cleaned out, vacuum it out. So I know my system is, I've got the galley sink, got 2 water tanks, a galley sink, hot water heater, shower, and the head sink. Not a very complicated boat, so it's, you know, it's kind of easy that way. But if you're looking around your boat and you see your systems, somebody put them in, so they got to be able to come apart, and it's entirely up to you how deeply involved you want to get in it. So that's what it is. That's a really good comment about the magnesium instead of the zinc for fresh water. I didn't know that. I appreciate the fellow popping it up. That was really good.
We got one last question about whether one should ease their rig tension a little bit when they take their boat out of the water, if they're leaving the rig up.
Ah, boy, I would ease it some, but not so that it's floppy.
A couple turns maybe, right? And
yeah,
if you're happy with what it is, mark it or record what you're taking off, right?
Yeah, I wouldn't loosen it. I think that's gonna let things shake, rattle, and roll all winter, and shake, rattle, and roll is pretty. It's just work hardened stuff. Honestly, I broke a shroud one time in my hand by work hardening it right next to the fitting. So I just imagine that any flopping around, and this gets to a whole nother point. If you ever go on your boat in the winter on a windy day and you got a nice cover on there, and it wraps over the stanchions, it goes down to the tow rail or maybe below the deck, off top sides. If you watch the cover on the stanchions, it's shaking all winter long. So think about what that's doing to the gasket or silicon sealer that you put around the base of the stanchion, and or to the deck fittings and the deck and the core. So anything you can do to stop shaking and chafe and movement is it's going to help you out in the long run. I'd love to answer some more questions, but I think we're running out of time. You guys can email Stan or me. Our email is right on the screen now. You can call the phone number. If I don't have the answer, or if Stan doesn't have the answer, we'll find the answer. And this is, to me, is a total blast. I learned something tonight about magnesium versus zinc, so that's good. And I certainly am happy to keep you guys all tuned in about the water-based paint and how well that worked for me. I think it's a worthwhile thing to explore. It was deep in the tech manual where I found that little comment.
Thank you, Brad. That was great. Thank you, everybody, for watching. Thank you for writing in with questions. And we're going to be doing these throughout the winter. So check back with the website. We'll be advertising another one soon.
Yeah, if any of you have suggestions about what you'd like Stan and me to flap our jaws about, let me know. I'll try and put something together. If you've got a specific club you want us to talk to, let us know. We'll try and come up with something. Happy to do it. So take care. Good luck this winter. Everybody stay healthy, stay well. Next spring will be different sailing conditions. I hope we can sail with more than 2 or 3 people on our boats. And let's go skiing and have a fun winter. Take care.
Great. Thank you.